All right, here's a quick pop quiz. What do Kim Kardashian, Justin Bieber, and Mr. Beast all have in common, other than 1 billion followers on social media? Yeah, they all use Shopify to run their businesses. An often overlooked secret of success is actually the businesses behind the business making selling simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet, and the not-so-secret secret, with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going... So, if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Kim uses for Skims. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/theathletic. It's all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/theathletic to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/theathletic.
A couple of years ago, I was drinking an Athletic non-alcoholic beer, and I thought, hey, I write for The Athletic. I'm drinking and enjoying this Athletic non-alcoholic beer. I wonder if one day these two companies can come together. And look at us now, baby. Look at us now. Because I was thinking that about Athletic non-alcoholic beer because I was enjoying it. It was crisp. It tasted good. I grew up in an era where non-alcoholic beers tasted like toenail broth. With every sip, I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm drinking a non-alcoholic beer, all right. It tasted really good. It tasted what I was used to. And they have a ton of varieties. They have IPAs, extra darks, sours, hazies. They have light brews and goldens. I like drinking them. They come in handy in all sorts of different situations. So this summer, ask for the only non-alcoholic beer you need to know, Athletic. Head to askforathletic.com to find it near you and use the code TA2024 to get 15% off your first online order. That's code TA2024 at checkout for 15% off. It's near beer, non-alcoholic beer, and it tastes... Listen, I grew up with some funky ones. Those didn't taste like beer. This tastes like this is good non-alcoholic beer. Exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and one of the big stories in F1 at Monza last weekend was Kimi Antonelli's F1 public debut, which ended in a 52G crash at Parabolica. Now he's officially confirmed as a Mercedes race driver in 2025. Is he ready for it, or did his Italy prang show it's a case of too much, too soon? Joining us to answer those questions and many more are Scott Mitchell-Malm and Mark Hughes. Well, Scott and Mark, back together again. Antonelli's an interesting one, isn't it? We're going to get into the detail of him, but there was a bit of a feeling of import, wasn't there? Everyone will talk about the famous debuts and that kind of thing, and it was just quite funny, wasn't it? Because it was this is going to be a really important landmark session, and then it all went wrong. So kind of funny in a way.
I'll let Mark have first crack at this. I got into it a little bit on the post-race podcast, didn't I, from Monza? But Mark, you were there, so I'm guessing you had a bit more of a flavour of just how ridiculous it was at the time in the moment.
Yeah, it was one of those things where you turn around, you first of all, you're concerned that he's okay. And then when it was apparently was okay, you think, yeah, I suppose that was predictable. There was so much build up to it. And his approach is so much sort of flat out. And there was so much, I think, will from the team and Toto Wolff in particular for him to say, to lay this marker down saying, look, we know he's only 18. We know he hasn't got very much experience, but this kid is amazing. Just watch. And so I think that was very much the ambience of the whole session going in as I went into the session. And it was just in the circumstances with a tyre he hadn't been on before, the soft tyre, and a dusty track, and he was so fast through Lesmo too, and so fast through Ascari that by the time he got to Parabolica, the tyres were very, very hot, which would normally not be a particular problem. It would just mean he's a little bit slow through there. But he attacked so hard in the Parabolica, and I know you've had a look at the speed readings on the GPS, Scott.
And the braking distances.
Yeah. There's just no way an over temperature rear tyre was going to accept that, and of course, did the predictable and spat him into the barriers. Now that's just apart from you won't always be looking to lay that marker down every time you get into a car in future. Also, you will be more aware of the behaviour of the tyres and the technicalities of temperature and stuff like that. So it all just conspired in an unfortunate way to do what it did. But we looked at each other, me and Ed, afterwards, and I guess that was always going to happen, wasn't it?
The way it happened. I mean, we talked about this very briefly on the Sunday night show, but I don't think we're laughing about it now, and it is one of those situations where, in hindsight, I think it will become even more amusing, especially if he goes on to do what Mercedes thinks and achieves all these great things. It will be one of those amusing footnotes. Remember the time he embarrassed himself massively on his first public appearance in a Mercedes F1 car and put it in the barriers like that. I said this on Sunday evening, you can't just brush it off as that, because it was a silly and unnecessary thing to do. But when it happened, I experienced it in a slightly different way to the two of you, not just because I wasn't there, but because of the sort of slight timing delay I was on. So I was following Antonelli, or the plan was I was going to follow the whole FP1 with Antonelli very closely, log the lap times, check the runs compared to Hamilton, see how he's doing, short runs, long runs, etc. Look at his driving style, blah blah blah. Now to do that, I needed to have his onboard open on F1 TV. So I was following it from there, but I also had live timing as well because I need to log the lap times. Now, watching from home with this sort of various setup, everything was on a slightly different delay. Some of it, the live timings, probably only about 5 or 6 seconds behind where you guys are at the track, but my feed, the actual images I was watching, was about 30 or 40 seconds behind at best. So the timing was always slightly further ahead. So I'm watching his second flying lap. The first flying lap's already caught my attention. I was watching the second flying lap, and I can see this is already a step beyond the first lap. He's really leaning on it here. And as you mentioned, Mark, Lesmo too, Ascari, blah blah blah. But basically, as he was going between Lesmo and Ascari, the timing app that I had open comes up with a yellow flag, and then it comes up very quickly with a red flag. But in terms of what I'm watching, it hasn't reached that yet. So I didn't really think anything of it. And then I quickly checked on the map, and I could see a couple of cars going through Parabolica, and I was sort of thinking, okay, not really sure what's happened here. And then as Antonelli on my screen was coming through Ascari, I noticed his dot didn't exist anymore on the live timing app. And I just thought, oh no, I think I know what's coming. And then when he tipped it into Parabolica, I was thinking it's definitely that he's definitely crashing here. That's 100%. But it was so strange because it was like this kind of whereas for you it must have been just like an instant in the moment kind of shock and maybe sort of 10-15% of, oh God, this was bound to happen, wasn't it? Whereas for me, it kind of like, I had like 10-15 seconds to realise I think he's about to crash massively. And it was just so weird. I don't think I've ever experienced sort of something like that before because of that kind of confluence of factors that meant how I was watching it was delayed in such a weird way.
Well, I had the view from the first chicane because I was watching trackside, but I could see it live because there's a big screen there. So, yeah, I was aware of that. I wasn't specifically watching the big screen when it happened because I was watching other cars coming through, but you could see, him going off, and it's just one of those funny ones in a way. And I know we shouldn't really laugh at it, but I think there was some merit in people likened it to the famous Gilles Villeneuve F1 debut in the McLaren at Silverstone in '77 when he was testing and just endlessly spinning. I'm sure legend has built it up into far more spins and offs than there actually were, but that thing of sort of finding the limit and wanting to get to the limit quickly, etc. And I'm sure if Antonelli goes on to do what it looks like he has the potential maybe to do, then it will have a Villeneuve-esque story about it. And as an aside, Villeneuve's famous F1 debut, chief mechanic that weekend, was Gary Anderson.
There's another historical parallel going back a much further into the 1920s, and when Tazio Nuvolari was given a test by Alfa Romeo, which was at the time the top Grand Prix team, and he was at the time he'd started car racing with his own Bugatti, but it was just a privateer thing, and he was a motorcycling star, and he crashed pretty much first lap or second lap, I think, at Ascari at Monza. And the Alfa technical guy, Vittorio Ianna, was so unimpressed that he didn't give Nuvolari any opportunity. And he finally got into there many years later and dominated the 1932 season. But yeah, it was he went on to be one of the greatest, some would argue still the greatest Grand Prix driver of all time. And he did something very similar.
There you go, the new Nuvolari. You heard it here first. That's the Mark Hughes prediction. But yeah, these things do happen. But still, it's very much worth delving into and looking at the wider story around Antonelli, because he was confirmed. They had a big press conference on the Saturday morning as well. So lots to talk about there. And Scott, as we said, we only briefly discussed Antonelli after Monza. Crashing on your second flying lap is clearly not a good thing, but do you think Toto Wolff was justified in saying, and I quote, "What we have seen in 1.5 laps is just astonishing," or was that just taking it a little bit too far?
It was hyperbole. It was grounded in some truth because of what we've all said, really, about kind of different aspects of how he performed in that, well, a little bit more than 1.5 laps, to be fair to Antonelli, because He is pretty well prepared at this point in terms of his F1 testing experience. Not in terms of his overall single-seater career experience, but he's done, I think, 9 days in terms of TPC running across 21, but mostly 2022 car machinery. But I think his first run was at the Red Bull Ring, I think, was in the 21 car, just to kind of introduce him in something a little bit more known and friendly than that 2022 Mercedes. The rest of it, though, 2022 car machinery. So he'll have done probably thousands of kilometres by now. And he's obviously very good.
He's done about 4,500 of TPC running kilometres.
He's obviously a very good driver. So you saw that. That's what you saw in those first couple of laps that he was able to do in FP1. You saw a driver that wasn't overawed by the situation, because he didn't crash because he was overawed by it. He didn't crash because he was panicking, because he was out of his depth or anything like that. It was, if anything, he was too confident. He was over ambitious. He kind of wanted to do something that the car wasn't yet capable of, but he was as a driver, or thought he was as a driver. So that's not quite the same as being overawed. He just looked confident, competent, and comfortable, I would say, up until the point where he stuffed it in the barriers. And it sounds so stupid to say that when he did that, but it's really important to understand that what he was doing in that first lap and a half obviously contributed to the crash, but they weren't the same thing. I'm always more worried when I see a young driver step in for FP1 and just not look on top of the car, not look capable of throwing it around, driving so much within their limits and their car's limits. You know, Isaac Hadjar's Red Bull outing at Silverstone, for example, was so tentative. He looked terrified of crashing it, and leaning on it, and so he was miles off the pace. That does, as long as Antonelli gets back in the car in FP1 and the next season and doesn't throw it into the barriers at the end of the second lap, I'd rather have his kind of FP1 than an FP1 where you show nothing and look like you're out of your depth and scared of being in an F1 car.
Yeah, I think I know what Toto is referring to. I don't know if it's hyperbole, but it was certainly probably eyebrow raising given that the guy has just crashed. But when you look at his speed through Ascari, which was even at the end of the session after everyone's had a proper go at it on an improved track, he still went through there 10 kilometres quicker than anyone else. You still have to be quite an amazing driver just to do that. So it gives a little indication of just what potential is in there. And I think, okay, it wasn't appropriate to be pushing that hard that early, but the fact that he can push that hard just tells you what's in store.
I think the way you framed it there is important, because that is different to how some people I saw were talking about it. Because after it happened, I think a lot of people were comparing it to other drivers through those corners in that moment, like at the start of that session. It's like, yeah, but he'd just gone through there much quicker than Verstappen and Hamilton had. But to which the only response is, yes, because Hamilton and Verstappen knew not to go through there that quickly on the second lap of the session, because by the end of the lap, the grip's not going to be there, the tyres are going to be gone. But if they've got to the end of FP1, when it's the car's capable of doing it and it's a little bit more, like, that's a more relevant comparison. I think the way you framed it there. I didn't like the way it was sort of being talked about a little bit afterwards, where there were some suggestions that, because to me it was just like any driver can go super fast on that first or second lap, but the experienced drivers aren't going to, because they know that it's going to wreck their tyres. But with those drivers did eventually then do a push lap and still weren't quite as quick through some of those corners, that is more telling. So it is interesting, and obviously you can frame it different ways. There'll be a lot of people, I'm sure, listening to this and thinking we're making a load of excuses for Antonelli because he's just thrown it in the wall and we should be hammering a bit more for it.
Oh, it's a massively stupid thing to have done. Definitely. But you don't do it next time. That's the thing. Toto Wolff is not an idiot. He knows how good Antonelli is, but he knows that in selecting him for the race seat next year, he is asking a lot, and there's going to be mishaps. That's just going to be the case, isn't it? There'll be a few times where he overdoes it. He's learning where the limit is. You have that allowance for a rookie, doubly so for someone of this experience and age. But it's how much potential there is there that's very real. And Wolff wasn't lying when he talked up how astonished he was. He was genuinely astonished by the pace that was there. The fact that he then crashed doesn't kind of count against that. But obviously, there's a risk with Antonelli that this can be the foundation point for a ramp up of pressure if he goes to race one next year and throws it off, and that can create a big challenge. So they'll be hoping that he can start next season nice and cleanly, things don't go wrong. He can't keep doing this sort of thing, obviously, but I don't think there's any evidence that that's the case. I mean, it was a high pressure situation, home soil, being announced that weekend, first public run. So yeah, you can understand it. It got on top of him a little bit, and that's part of the learning curve. They just have to see it as part of that process. The one, I'm not going to say it's a positive, but at least it's out the way. He's got a crash out the way. So doesn't mean he can't crash later, but that's something from that perspective. I don't know what you thought, Mark, but obviously we had that press conference on the Saturday morning. Antonelli didn't speak to us on Friday evening as he was going to, because he wasn't feeling great after the crash and he'd had F2. I suspect that was maybe the team protecting him a little bit, which wouldn't be ridiculous. But anyway, so we had the press conference the next morning with George Russell there, Toto Wolff, Kimi Antonelli there. What did you make of that? Antonelli himself was quite careful not to say too much, and Toto kind of did the heavy lifting, which I think tells you a little bit about how aware Wolff is of just needing to make sure he guides Antonelli well through this experience. Yeah,
there is an element, it is a paternal relationship there, I think, definitely. Toto is very, very protective of him. He is just a kid, he's only just turned 18, so you got to, you got to look at him as an 18-year-old, also as a very, very gifted Formula One driver. But I think as those two elements sort of come together as he gets more experienced, I'm sure you'll see the full personality of Kimi come out, but he's very. He seems very genuine. He's very effervescent. He's very natural. Really likable guy. He's. I think. The Toto probably didn't want to have him trip himself up and get quoted as saying stuff that could be used against him. So I think just at this early stage, this is he's been held on a very tight leash by Toto in terms of his outward facing public persona. But I'm sure it'll all play out, and I think he's a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a choice I think deserves to pay off. They backed a great talent there and will develop him, and that should pay off well. We've got a few questions from the Race Members Club on this topic. We're going to get into lots of members' questions in parts 2 and 3. But Scott, the first question from Paul Sennocker related to Antonelli says, thinking of Kimi's debut, I can recall some teams having their drivers pay for damages from a crash. Can you elaborate a bit on this?
I think the most famous example is nothing to do with like a rookie driver coming in or an FP1 outing, but it's the Hamilton-Rosberg crash, isn't it, from the Spanish Grand Prix in 2016. I'm pretty sure that the repairs from that accident came out. I think the drivers were responsible for it. In terms of Friday practice outings or that kind of thing, I think it depends on your role within the team. And I think it depends on the nature of where your debut has come from. If you're getting a Friday practice outing because your sponsor's paying for it, a few years ago before this rookie FP1 stuff was a thing, that would happen, wouldn't it? You'd have young drivers or third drivers or whatever would appear. I don't know. Maybe it'd be a bit harsh to name names, but in those situations, they are in the car because someone is paying for them to be in the car. And I think that's the kind of situation where you basically have a little bit of insurance from the sponsor, which is if they crash it, if they damage this, it's going to cost you this much money, or it's a certain payment in advance, right? Like as part of their deal, it's like, okay, we'll pay you this much money for him to be the third driver, which means he'll get this many tests and FP1 outings over the course of the year. This is how, and the team goes, yep, fine. This is how much it's going to cost. They're baking that kind of money, that kind of cost into the deal. I can't think of any other examples. Maybe I'm missing something obvious.
Yeah, the famous one is the one Rosberg's talked about recently, but that was part of the wider thing, wasn't it, with Mercedes collisions and that kind of thing with him and Hamilton. So that was more a sort of punishment type thing rather than a necessity. I think it's relatively rare to have outright, we're going to charge you for damage you're doing. But yeah, what Scott you described is the way things might work. Mark, a question from James Arick, who says, why has Toto Wolff promoted Antonelli to Mercedes so quickly when he farmed out George Russell for so long at Williams? It seems like he has completely flipped his philosophy. Surely it would have made sense to farm out Antonelli for a couple of years whilst he is chasing Verstappen. Yeah,
it is different philosophy, different circumstances, different driver. But I think partly one of the reasons that he wants to not park Antonelli somewhere else for too long is that he recognises that George was at least a year too long at Williams, probably 2 years too long there. And why not let him get his experience at the team if you want him there? So I think when it was when Toto first took that decision, which he says was about 5 minutes after Lewis Hamilton informed him of his move to Ferrari, the competitive prospects of Mercedes looked a lot less rosy than they do now. And maybe he's thinking, okay, well, let's just have a 25 build season with Antonelli as we sort the car out with the aim of, we'll be ready to really roll in 26 under the new regulations. But the competitive prospects of Mercedes look a little better now. So you might be looking at, well, surely a rookie's not going to help you in your quest for a Constructors' Championship if you've got a competitive car. But I think that's a secondary consideration, really. He's decided this is the guy he wants. He doesn't want to let him slip through his fingers. He had the chance to sign Max Verstappen, but lost him through not offering him an F2 deal, in F1 deal. He was talking of placing him in an F2 team, and then maybe placing him a first season of F1 the year after that. Whereas Red Bull just famously said to Jos Verstappen, "I'll forget about all the preparation. We'll just bring him straight into Formula One," and that's how Toto lost Max Verstappen. And I think that stung a little bit, and that's definitely formed part of why he wants to make sure he holds on to this one, because he considers them to be of the same caliber.
Question from Jacobus VDL now that I'll take, who asks, are all of the leadership in Mercedes on board with replacing Hamilton and Antonelli? Are there any who strongly disagree? It's quite a pertinent question, because not only are there other senior figures in the team, but also the ownership of this team there's three equal parties that own 33.3% each, basically. So Toto Wolff is 1/3, Ineos, so Jim Ratcliffe is another third, and then Mercedes is the final third, as it were. So they've all got a say. But the way it works, one of the reasons Mercedes has been successful is it does run very much as a race team. So as far as I understand it, Ineos aren't particularly an interventionist on things. It's not like their deal they've got with Manchester United, for example, where they have a minority stake, but they've got management control. In this case, management control is basically Toto Wolff. But obviously the Mercedes board had to agree, and they like the idea as well. They'll have had to sign off. Ineos will as well, but Wolff holds a lot of influence, and obviously he'll have consulted with James Vowles and Andrew Shovlin, all the senior people in the team. He'll have made sure that he's had their opinions in case anyone's got massive reservations. And yeah, as far as I understand it, there's a pretty decent amount of support for the thing. Toto Wolff has been the kind of driver for it, but it's not just Wolff on his own, just going his own way. He's had to make sure that everyone else agrees with it.
The thing that Mercedes benefits from, I think, in these kind of scenarios is that while Wolff can be very emotionally driven, and for all of the reasons Mark was explaining there, missing out on Verstappen in the past, kind of wanted to right that wrong. I'm sure an element of feeling jilted by the fact that Hamilton has decided to leave, just as Mercedes felt like it was getting on top of things and was going to Ferrari. Plus, obviously, some excitement building about Kimi. I think all of those factors kind of come together and make Wolff kind of just have a real personal desire to make it happen. To be like, all right, I'm going to put this kid in the car then, because I think he's going to be brilliant. And I don't think it's not foolhardy or anything like that. But I do think it comes from an emotional place to a degree. Wolff has talked so openly, hasn't he, about how he is he has worked to get in control of his emotions better and deal with kind of the extremities. But the beauty of it when it comes to decisions like this, which is the point I was going to make, is that when you have James Vowles and Andrew Shovlin, other people, and think Gwen Legru, how good is Kimi? No one knows better than Gwen Legru, who is in charge of the Mercedes Young Driver program. He was brought in to do that by Wolff in, was it 2015 at the end of the Gravity and Lotus program? Because Gwen was in charge of that before, wasn't he?
Yeah, the Gravity Sport Management that brought people like Grosjean and Ocon through.
Yeah, so, Legru's responsible for, Russell coming into the Mercedes camp and eventually becoming an F1 driver. It's almost a little bit head and heart. Wolff is the heart. He's the emotion. He's the kind of passion, the kind of, not shoot from the hip because he's a businessman. He's very intelligent, but he kind of has these, I really want to do this. How do we make this happen? And then his brains trust basically comes in and vets the quality of the proposal effectively and fills in all of the little blanks. Wolff's not present for every single race that Antonelli's done in his career. I doubt he's 100% across every detail of the TPC running, but he will trust people to feed back what he needs to know. And then that all comes together for a decision like this. I quite like that. If it's important for an organisation like this to have one person at the top to be able to make the decision, but when you have a setup that allows so many different knowledge bases to feed in, I think that's a very good way to go about things. It prevents something being done purely out of emotion or kind of, like personal choice.
Yeah, and everyone who's been involved with Antonelli does agree that there's a huge amount of ability there. This is potentially a generational talent. So it's not sort of flailing around at grasping for another Verstappen. There's good reason to believe it. Yeah, there's a risk element to it. The pragmatic, sensible choice would have been to just hang back and say, oh, well, I've Carlos Sainz for a few years. That would have been a perfectly good move for Mercedes. But it's a move that, deserves to pay off, and it's the kind of thing we want to see teams doing, taking bold decisions that have a huge upside.
You know we love talking stats here at The Athletic. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cash Back Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right, you could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
Summer drinking season is long. Boy, don't we know that on Summer of Champions. Whew, it's been a lot, which is why non-alcoholic beer is a great addition to your beverage rotation. But what makes you reach for one NA beer over another? Great flavor? Variety of styles? Cool can? Athletic Brewing brings it all to the table. Taste, options, looks. They're not only full flavor, but they're perfect for a long day at the beach or the pool. My two favorites right now are the Upside Dawn Golden and the Summer Seasonal Lemon Radler, Ripe Pursuit. They just sound tasty. IPAs, extra darks, sours, hazies, and summertime favorites like light brews and goldens. You can enjoy them anytime, anywhere, without ever slowing down your summer. Music festivals, baseball games, which I've done, camping, late nights, literally wherever summer takes you. Keep the good times rolling, I say. This summer, ask for the only non-alcoholic beer you need to know, Athletic. Head to askforathletic.com to find it near you and use code TA2024 to get 15% off your first online order. That's code TA2024 at checkout for 15% off your first order. Near beer, exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times.
Time now to tell you about the sponsor of this episode, Grammarly. Do you struggle with when to use fewer instead of less? Do you find yourself writing important emails which, when you look back on them, take far too long to get to the point? Are you guilty of exclamation marks and too much jargon? Well, Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you find the words you need and the right text for your context. It learns your personal style and your brand or company style to give you personalised suggestions based on what you're writing and who's going to read it. Grammarly works across all the apps and sites you use like Word, Google Docs, Pages, Slack and more, so there's no need to copy and paste. Grammarly works where you work. Smart features like tone suggestions help you navigate even the most difficult work conversations. And what's more, data privacy and security are woven into the foundations of Grammarly. It's the gold standard of responsible AI with 15 years of best-in-class communication, trusted by tens of millions of professionals and IT departments. So get AI writing support that works where you work. Download Grammarly for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. Grammarly. Easier said, done.
Right, we're about to get into listener questions, but first, Scott, a quick update on Flexi Wings. There's some more muttering about this. What's going on?
The latest instalment of something that will forever be an issue in Formula One, but has been, I think, particularly interesting as this rule set has developed, because even in the ground effect era, where all of that lovely performance comes from under the floor, we've kind of gone slightly older school aero in a way, where the front wing is becoming more important again. And there's a bit of a dispute that has been going on for a while in the background. And it's all based around McLaren and Mercedes, seemingly, as Red Bull and Ferrari see it, having very different solutions in terms of maximising aeroelasticity. Because while the rules demand rigidity from aerodynamic parts of the bodywork, total rigidity is not possible. So there's an acceptance that there has to be a certain amount of bend, basically, that there'll be deformation to a point. Red Bull and Ferrari basically feel like there's too much on the McLaren and the Mercedes front wings. And they've basically been pushing for clarification, and there's a fresh push to either determine whether those wings are legal or basically know exactly what they can and can't do, off the back of, well, Red Bull obviously losing their way and Ferrari struggling to make progress of the likes of McLaren and Mercedes. So where we're at is that the McLaren wing and the Mercedes wing as well, they're legal. The FIA has said that they are legal. They've passed every load test, which is the main way in which the rigidity of the front wing is actually measured. If you pass that load test, which is obviously a static test, to all intents and purposes, you are legal. What the FIA is doing is it accepts that when you have those static load tests, that doesn't reflect how that wing works in reality, and that there might be more flexing than would be ideally allowed when that wing runs in reality. There's different ways of designing it. So all wings pass the test, but then some wings deform more than others when they're actually at high speed and under maximum load. So the FIA has been running small cameras on the front wings of cars, looking across the front wing properly, seeing it in full, because the FOM broadcast cameras don't do that. It's been doing that since Spa. It will carry on doing that until at least Singapore, so a couple more races. It's an ongoing issue. It isn't, it's not dead and buried, but it isn't the kind of thing where there's massive suspicions that McLaren's cheating and that's why. But it's basically a pretty, I would say, well-established area of aerodynamic dark arts. And McLaren and Mercedes seem to be doing a very good job at that at the moment. And I suspect the answer to Red Bull and Ferrari will be, I think you need to work out how they're doing what they're doing and try and replicate it. Because if it's legal, it's a massive performance gain. And it could be the difference between you having these balance issues that Red Bull have had and not. Because it's one of the reasons I think Mercedes moved out of that kind of nasty place with a disconnected front and rear balance at high speed and low speed. So interesting, and I appreciate that was probably like quite a lengthy answer, but that kind of feels like where we're at with it at the moment. But feel free to pile in, the two of you, if I've massively misrepresented the whole Flexi Wing argument there, because you're much more well versed on these technical matters than I am.
No, I think that's fairly accurate. I think the whole issue of front wing is become enhanced because exactly of the limitations that you come up against with this generation of ground effect cars. Yes, they generate the downforce mainly from the underbody, but the balance issue is very different at low speed and high speed. And so ideally you want the front wing to behave in a less aggressive way at high speed than it does at low speed. So flexibility is the ideal answer to that. So therefore it's got a much more enhanced importance than it used to have when flexibility was just about dumping a little bit of drag down the straights. It's now more about getting a nice handling balance across the speed range.
Yeah, and it's always been the way that teams will push it as far as they can because there has to be some movement and there'll always be paranoia and suspicions, etc., etc. So it's the latest step forward in that. And I think it's important to stress it's not a question of Team X or Y is cheating and a massive panic. It's just trying to see how far you can go with these regs. Right, well, let's dive into questions in the Race Members Club. Now, of course, if you're interested in the Race Members Club, you'll hear us talking about Patreon a lot as we've launched on there. If you want to see what the fuss is about, ad-free listening, you'll get bonus episodes as well. There's currently a 7-day free trial running. Head to the link in the description to find out more. And you can also, if you just go into Patreon and search for the race, you'll find us there. Right, the first question, Scott. Sean Murphy says, Toto wanted him. Mercedes are improving fast. Red Bull are in a state of civil war. Newey is leaving. The Drivers' Championship is slipping fast. And the 2026 Ford Tyne doesn't inspire confidence. Why didn't Max Verstappen jump ship to Mercedes for next year instead of allowing Antonelli to take the seat? I'm struggling to see the logic of his inaction.
With questions like that, we might want to employ Sean to write some of our video scripts. That'd be quite a good intro. Just a very punchy way of relaying it, because there isn't really a better way of framing it than Sean has there. It is, I think the only logical answer to it is that he couldn't. I think as much as I do sincerely believe Verstappen likes the idea of seeing out this Red Bull contract and maybe even seeing out his F1 career with Red Bull, I also believe Max is honest when he says he doesn't really see himself in F1 in the ultra long term, that this contract with Red Bull could be his last one and that he walks away at the end of 2028. I think all of those things are true, but I think Max's competitive desires and his standards and what he expects, I think that trumps everything else. Max isn't where he is because of sentiment. So if he felt like the Red Bull situation was in disrepair and that the Mercedes move was possible, then whether it's for 25, 26 or 27, I think he'll make that move. So there's only two logical answers. One is he wasn't convinced that Mercedes would definitely be better than Red Bull next year, or beyond a reasonable doubt better than Red Bull next year. And two, which I suspect is what happens, that he couldn't. His contract doesn't allow it. if you were going to try and buy him out of it, the cost would be astronomical. There's been all this talk about whether Marco could be the fall guy and was willing to step aside and that would allow Max to go. But then apparently that option got taken away and Marco is at Red Bull for the short or medium term himself. So it almost feels like the move was taken off the table. Because as time has passed, I think Verstappen going to Mercedes has made more sense from a competitive point of view. Not just because it's the kind of more sensible place to be, or there's less noise around it than there is Red Bull, or because his dad's not at war with the team principal and all of this. The pure sporting element, which is what he cares about most, would seem to be moving towards Mercedes, but it's not definitive. So maybe Max just felt it's just a little bit too early. I don't know, but it has to be one of those two.
And the next question comes from Jan Alexander. Mark, replacing Logan Sargent at Williams was probably Mick Schumacher's best shot at returning to the grid. With Franco Colapinto getting this drive and promising rookies confirmed at other teams for 2025, is Schumacher's career in F1 finished?
Be careful to be so definitive, because there's always opportunities arising and people having to stand down through either injury or maybe like Kevin Magnussen getting too many points on the license, things like that. So he's still a known quantity of Formula One driver that might need to be plugged in somewhere. So I wouldn't say it's definitely over, but I would say his prospects of getting a full-time permanent ride on merit are probably gone. Yeah.
The next question is an amalgamation of questions from Matthew Clegg and Sarah. Is Gabriele Bortoleto under consideration for the second Sauber seat for 25, and how likely is it that will happen? And Tom Knight asks if Bortoleto's season in F2 has got the attention it deserves. Yes, he is under consideration for the second Sauber seat. Obviously, Fernando Alonso, through his A14 management company, is pushing him. How likely is it? I would be very surprised if they didn't decide to stick with the experience of Bottas, because I do think they need that. They've got a long way to go, that team. And Bottas has been frustrated with some of the way things have gone over the past couple of years. And so there's plenty that needs to be done. And Binotto likes Bottas, certainly. But the decision, as far as I know, isn't made. So Bortoleto is still in the mix. If they decide to go down the rookie path, then he would appear to be in a good position for them to take him. In terms of the attention, he's second in the championship now. He could win the championship. He had that fantastic victory at Monza as well. So I think he's getting some attention now. He got quite a bit from winning F3. He's on McLaren's books as well. So yeah, obviously there's been a lot of focus on the Antonellis and the Behrmans in F2, but I think as we get to the business end of the season, Bortoleto's reputation has quite rightly been enhanced, and yeah, he's certainly someone who could well have a future in F1, if not next year with Sauber, then potentially beyond that. Scott, a question from Kieran Lister. With Behrman, Doohan, Colapinto and Antonelli being called up to the grid over past F2 alumni such as Drugovich, Lawson and Pocher, does this mean there's a lost generation of young drivers whose times have come and gone?
There always is, because there are always too many drivers or too many young drivers coming through and not enough seats available for them. So there's always talents that miss out. We're in a little bit of a run at the moment of the champions in Formula 2 either being considered irrelevant or just not quite good enough or whatever, because teams are putting more emphasis, I think, than ever before on their own driver programs, their own academies. The amount of money that goes into them, especially when it comes to running test programs with 2-year-old cars, is significant, and you kind of need that return on that investment by then putting some of those drivers into race seats. That was clearly a deciding factor in picking Colapinto over Schumacher, Williams backing its own, and I think it was right to do that. It's harder to see the champions on the sidelines. I don't believe that Drugovich winning F2 and Pocher winning F2 merited an F1 seat in the same way that Oscar Piastri did, for example. I felt that Piastri not getting onto the grid straight away was a ridiculous state of affairs, whereas Drugovich and Pocher, it was more unfortunate, because I just don't, my personal opinion, I don't think either of those two are superstars in waiting. But if they'd got Formula 1 seats off the back of being Formula 2 champion, of course it would have been merited. So it's just, there's a difference, there's kind of like tiers of almost whether or how much, not necessarily they deserve it, but sort of how bad the situation is if they don't get those seats. Lawson, for example, slightly different because he's just in a unfortunate world of pain with the Red Bull driver madness, which is out of his control. He did a great job when he stepped in the circumstances last year, and he should have been rewarded with a driver of some kind. He should get that eventually, but it's just not forthcoming at the moment. So we'll see where it goes this year. There's a decent chance that the F2 champion this year doesn't have a race drive in Formula 1 next year. And maybe they won't ever get into Formula 1. There are many problems with the single-seater pyramid and the way it's slimmed down and the way it's run, it's managed, the costs of everything, the formats, the types of car, problems with the car, and unfortunately the lack of progression from some of those drivers is another element of concern.
And our final question in this area, Mark, from Benjamin Tampin. Is there anyone I'm missing coming through the feeder series that could be classed as special? And also, could both F2 and F3 benefit from a Moto 2-3 model of going to more rounds in support of F1, making them both world championships in their own right?
I don't think the status of the label that you put on the championship really would have much effect. I think they're both F3 and F2 are, they have a spotlight in front of the F1 crowd, and I think that's good. And that's where the drivers are putting their academy people. So there's plenty of interest there and plenty of knowledge there. Who's coming through? No, there's no. I don't see in F3 and F2 at the moment. The next Antonelli, as it were, not yet. But there'll undoubtedly be someone coming through karting and Formula 4, whatever. One guy that I think is very interesting, but he's not on the single-seater ladder. He's a Peugeot endurance driver. Is the Danish young driver Malte Jacobsen. I think he looks like someone that would definitely be worth putting in some sort of. Put him in a simulator, but put him in a F3 car, F2 car, just to see where he is, because it looks like he might be an exceptional talent. He's a little bit off the radar, but no, the next one will become obvious when he arrives.
That's a great call. Very interested to see if he was to dabble in single seaters. But yes, well, there's always going to be some special drivers coming along. But I don't think Moto 2-3 style thing will work, even if you could solve the problem of getting the costs aligned. I think if you had 24 F2 and F3 races, the budgets would be rather painful if they're not already, which of course they are.
Hi, I'm Jason Alexander, or as you probably know me, Royal Flusher 25 from WSOP free-to-play app. WSOP players, I have some free chips just for you. Go hit the tables like the legends you are. Download the WSOP free-to-play app where you can win rings and bracelets and tournaments and show them off to everyone at the table.
If you love poker, play poker with 1 million extra chips using this promo code, WSOPFREE1M.
This episode of the Race F1 podcast is sponsored by ZBiotics. ZBiotics is an absolute game changer because if, like me, you're in your mid-40s, having a night out with a few drinks can leave you feeling considerably worse the next day, and you can't bounce back the way you did when you were in your 20s. But with ZBiotics, you don't have to make that choice between having a great night or a great next day. There's a surefire way to wake up feeling fresh after a night of drinking. It's with pre-alcohol. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. And in the words of Jennifer Aniston, here's the science bit. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. So, just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Try it for yourself, and you will believe the hype. Go to zbiotics.com/race to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use RACE at the checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. That's the letter Z, or Z if like me you're in the UK, BIOTICS.com/race and the code RACE at checkout for 15% off. One last time, zbiotics.com/race.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Well, let's move on to our final batch of questions now. Scott, Jeremy Husted says, in the fullness of time, will this McLaren bungling of strategy be the one that finally cost them the 2024 Drivers' Championship?
I think this might be a season that is decided by loads and loads of small factors. I don't think there's going to be like one single moment. It would be surprising anyway. Whereas, 2021, for example, the ultimate example when we ended up with that effectively winner takes all finale, that was a season that had as many swings in one direction as it seemed to in the other, which is how we ended up in a situation where there was that kind of finale in store, and then the finale, that single race plays out the way it does, which then gives everybody that one moment to be able to say, well, that's what that literally decided the title. The race was going to finish one way and the championship was going to be decided one way. Something happened that changed the race result and therefore the championship result. This season, you're going to have, if it trends to the end of the year the way it is at the moment, I think you could broadly split this season up into roughly 1/3 where the Red Bull's the fastest, 1/3 where the Red Bull and the McLaren are roughly equal, and 1/3 where the McLaren's fastest. And therefore, equal opportunity from both teams to win both championships, in theory. It's not quite as simple as that. It's just sort of a rough breakdown of where the championship's at. As it stands right now, Red Bull and Verstappen have simply done a better job in many areas. It isn't just strategy. It's in other elements of race execution, communication between the driver and the team, which feeds into strategy, start execution and consistency, individual driver performance, the quality of the 2 drivers within the team. The strategy on McLaren's side is going to come into it, but it isn't going to be, unless it boils down to one single race at the end of the year and then McLaren bungles the strategy in that race. I can't say I believe it'll be the single deciding factor. And I'd also point out that at Monza, even though there was rightly a lot of scrutiny on McLaren and ultimately the choice of strategy between them and Ferrari decided the race, they did run a faster race than Red Bull. Not just in terms of having a faster car. I think the way McLaren played their strategy versus Red Bull was the faster way of doing it. So you could argue that Red Bull bungled the Monza strategy more than McLaren did, but it just obviously wasn't that way in terms of race result, which is why correctly it doesn't get the same level of scrutiny. So I don't think that McLaren's bad by any means on this score. I think it's just one area of many where sometimes it has not been at its maximum, and when you're up against Red Bull and Verstappen, usually until very recently, basically the last weekend, because at Zandvoort Verstappen still managed to beat one of the McLarens, you do need to be at your best.
On a related note, Mark, Gareth Moore says, is it likely that a long-term Norris-Piastri driver lineup is untenable come 2026 if McLaren continues to be a front-running car?
No, I don't think it's untenable. I think as Piastri develops further, just filling in the little gaps in his data banks and becomes more consistently the peak Piastri we've seen several times this season, they'll just, the space around them will expand to accommodate them, and you'll just have 2 very competitive drivers at every race, and that's just how it is. I don't think it's untenable. Neither one is going to be the number 2 to the other one ever, but that's fine. You can run a team like that. There are many instances of that being successful. You don't need a number 1 and a support driver, and I don't think either of those would ever fall into that role.
Question from Simon Ems now that I'll take. Given that McLaren are contenders for both championships this year, are the days of needing to be a works team to get success over? Well, yeah, by definition, it's not absolutely critical. It's not a prerequisite to be a works team, and there have been times where that's the case, and certainly McLaren are having a lot of success. There's various things in the rules, in what you have to give to your customers, etc., that means your customer package is going to be a very, very strong package. Now, my only concern with it is that if you are a customer team, there's always going to be a fraction of performance that the works team might be able to gain. They'll always get the very best parts. And, not every part is absolutely 100% identical. So you might get a tiny incremental little bit more performance. Ultimately, Mercedes has control over the packaging. McLaren does consult on it. They're quite actively involved in that. They can give feedback. But Mercedes does have full control. Now, what performance value you put on it, it's not very much. Andreas Steller has said it's very small, but he accepts the principle that it does exist. So the only concern is that if Mercedes get 100% out of what they've got and McLaren get 100% out of what they've got, then Mercedes will probably have a very small edge. However, it's not a prerequisite. Customer deals aren't a generation of engine behind or a year-old engine or 40 brake horsepower down, 50 brake horsepower down. So it's not absolutely critical, and you're better to have a good customer engine than a bad works engine. However, there's no doubt that if you're a McLaren and they could have a great works engine partner that they're confident in, that they had full control in, they would do it. But yeah, what they've got now is the best of what's available to them, and it's pretty good. Scott, a question from Adam Clark. Is it time to accept that George Russell is a faster qualifier than Lewis Hamilton?
I think that's been proven this year in terms of the balance between the two of them over the first two seasons at Mercedes was fairly equal. But I think this year, with Hamilton's struggles, which I think are not an unreasonable percentage, down to a bit of an incompatibility of his driving style with the car. We've gone into that in quite a lot of detail. There's a video on our YouTube channel that goes into that and a written piece on the website from the summer break, so around August time. If you Google something like why Lewis Hamilton hates driving F1's current cars, throw the race in there as well. Don't forget the hyphen, and you should be able to find it. But there's also just a little bit of a speed difference, but it's really not much. Hamilton was super negative about himself on Saturday at Monza, but it was a tiny gap. The difference between being third on the grid and where Hamilton was in sixth was, less than half a tenth or around half a tenth. And if Hamilton had pieced his lap together, I think he would have beaten Piastri onto the front row. So, yes, he didn't execute, and he's rightly critical there. But there's a difference between being very fractionally worse at qualifying than Russell and being bad at qualifying. I don't really think it's necessarily at that level, but the number of times that Hamilton feels he hasn't got the most out of it, or you can see he hasn't got the most out of it, is too high for a driver of his standard, really, considering this is the driver with more poles than anyone in F1 history. So, yeah, the evidence is that Russell is probably, what do you reckon, half a tenth quicker in these cars, maybe, than Hamilton is?
This year, yeah.
On average, but not every time. And I don't think there's anything between them on Sundays, if not Hamilton's still a little bit better at races than Russell is.
Yeah, I think it is about half. It's less than a tenth, something like that. So yeah, the numbers are the numbers, and Russell has been quicker this year. But these things aren't cast in stone. There's so many examples of one driver's been clearly faster than another driver as a teammate, and then they switch cars, and the following year the situation's reversed. These things are hugely complex when things are so closely matched. That do with, as you touched on at the beginning of the answer, how that natural way of driving dovetails with the particular demands of this particular car, these particular tyres, etc. And it can be that one driver's got a huge advantage with one type of car and a huge disadvantage with another type of car. So, yeah, it's very close. They're both they're super quick drivers, but yes, this year Russell's a bit quicker.
Next up, a question from Chase Roberts for you, Mark. Why was the Red Bull so slow on the straights at Monza? I thought the RB20 was known for its straight line speed, especially with DRS.
It was, and it has been, and the RB19 was as well. But as they've developed the car, the aero development that they've taken with the car has introduced this imbalance in the handling, such that drivers feel they can't lean on the rear anymore. So as that's happened, they're arriving at racetracks needing to put more wing on. So it's just not it's not in the sweet spot that it was. It's efficiency sweet spot. The trade-off between drag and downforce has had to go way outside where it wants to be, just in order to give the drivers the rear end the need to hustle it into the corner and over a qualifying lap. And that just illustrates the problems that they've got.
Next up, a question from Chris Parrott that I'll take. Red Bull's 2024 reminds me a lot of Brawn GP in 2009. Clearly the best package at the start of the year, but their pace advantage was eroded as other teams caught and eventually overtook them for outright pace. Brawn held on for both championships in 2009, but were then nowhere in 2010 as Mercedes. Do you think a similar fate awaits Red Bull in 2025? It's possible if they don't get their technical house in order. However, it's a profoundly different mechanism because obviously Brawn were running on limited money in 2009, so their development slowed down. Red Bull's development, cost-wise, isn't restricted compared to anyone else. They can spend just as much as everyone else. They're only restricted by their knowledge and what they're doing. I also think it's going to be hard for Red Bull to certainly hold on to the Constructors' Championship, because on current trajectory, they are certainly going to lose it, because they're not just going to fall behind McLaren imminently, but Ferrari, if their floor does consistently work, as it did at Monza, could well reel them in as well, because they're not very far behind. So, yeah, different mechanism. But, yeah, it's very, very easy to get knocked off the top in Formula One, and it can take a long time to get back. So the work that's being done now isn't just about saving this season, but it's about making sure they're on the right trajectory technically for next year as well. Scott, a question from Jacobus VDL. What has happened to Aston Martin? How have they lost competitiveness so thoroughly, and what are they doing to recover?
Well, linked in with what you were saying there, Ed, about how easy it is to be knocked off the top in Formula One, it's also very difficult to get there. And this era of Formula One car is incredibly difficult to develop. We've seen, we talked about Flexi Wings earlier in this podcast, and just how fine that art of aeroelasticity is, because it's one thing to create something that deforms, but it's another to make sure that it deforms safely and kind of consistently and predictably, and how much you need it to as well. You don't want it to go overboard. And that's just one example. When you then think of how complex the designs of these cars are, as best as I can tell, a lot of teams aren't finding the issue being, how do we design the floor in a way that it produces a load of downforce? It's how the hell do we do it in a way that it's usable, that it doesn't start porpoising, that the front isn't massively detached from the rear in terms of the balance that it produces. And I think, despite the big brains trust that's been built there, I don't think Aston Martin's got that understanding. If it does, it's massively behind everybody else in terms of actually turning that into upgrades. I was getting a bit optimistic in the first half of the year that they were coming to that conclusion and they were sort of working through how to resolve it. But I don't know, have you seen any evidence of them actually executing it? Alonso's sounding much like more and more frustrated that there aren't relevant upgrades coming, or upgrades that he can have much faith in.
No, I've not seen any evidence of that. I think they need Adrian Newey there, someone with a bigger overview of understanding.
Well, that's definitely something they're trying to do, but big gains need to be made there. Mark, a question from Chris Ebbott. How do you rate James Vowles? I had extremely high hopes and thought much of him for the first part of last year. However, he seems to be on a downhill trajectory. Signing Logan Sargent for 2024, the spare chassis debacle, an overweight car, floor disqualification, 9th place in the championship, and now the poor handling of Mick Schumacher. Yes, there's the Carlos Sainz signing and apparently some good other hires, but I'm seeing James turn out to be more Gunther Steiner than Toto Wolff.
That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that he's arrived at a team that was in considerable disarray, many, many years behind the times in its practices and the organizational structure within. He's completely redone that in a very short space of time. He's got the team to be a much more modern, contemporary Formula One team. Has made some good, very solid key hires in the technical department. Very engineering-based understanding of the sport, but very good with people, very eloquent, so a good communicator. And yes, he's now got a driver lineup that's way in excess of the level that the team has been at in the last couple of years, illustrating that they have the faith in his vision. And Alex Albon was already there, but he extended. He convinced Alex that this was the place he needed to be when Alex could have gone elsewhere. And he's convinced Sainz of that vision as well. So I think he's done a very, very promising job so far. And the other things like crash damage and giving a rookie driver another chance. These are just racing things. These are just day-to-day things. But you look in the bigger picture, I think it's much, much rosier. And to look in the little details like that is you're not going to get an accurate picture.
Yeah, and I think the important bit of context there is just how deep a hole, just how far behind Williams had fallen in terms of all that infrastructure and the way the team was working. So there's an enormous amount for them to catch up on. The final question I'll take from Dave Langford. With the exception of Giuseppe Farina in 1950, has any other driver won the F1 Drivers' Championship in the same year that they won their first race? Well, that's obviously a question inspired by the possibility Lando Norris could do that. Yeah, it has happened a few times. Jack Brabham in 1959, Graham Hill in 1962, Denny Hulme in 1967. The only one that's pushing into the modern era, although probably it's quite a long time ago now, longer ago than I would care to think, Keke Rosberg in 1982. He got his first World Championship race win in 82, the year he won the title. But of course, he'd won the International Trophy a few years earlier for Theodore of all teams, so he had got a win. But yeah, it's very, very rare. There have been flirtations with it in more recent times. Jacques Villeneuve in 96 obviously came close, as did Lewis Hamilton in 2007. But yeah, that's and those of course were rookie seasons as well as first seasons when people have gone in top teams. But yeah, it's relatively rare. I guess Mark Webber was another example in 2009. Got his first win and was sort of on the periphery of the title fight, but never quite managed to get into contention. So yeah, quite unusual.
Would obviously had the season gone a little bit differently, Kubica would have come close, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, it's a good shout.
Yeah, Kubica, and he's still there. Yeah, that's another good one. Yeah, he got his victory in Canada, and it was only about 20 points behind at the end of the season, wasn't he? He's still irritated about the fact that BMW thought that was job done on for 2009 now.
I was going to say, give him a bit of time, and BMW might finally win that 2009 championship soon.
Exactly. So it is rare, but it can happen when you've got a confluence of getting into a top car, and then it's consistently so. So there's an opportunity for Norris to do that this year, although, as I keep saying, I'm still waiting for him to actually get properly into Drivers' Championship contention, because his process towards closing the gap is glacial. If you look at the past few months, it's there, but it's not quick enough. So let's see if that can change. Well, thanks to everyone for your questions. Remember to check out that Patreon 7-day free trial if you'd like to submit questions in the future and get all the other benefits of the Race Members Club. Thanks to Scott and Mark as well. Lots to be done before the next race in Baku, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.
The wait is finally over. The new NFL season starts this week. I'm Diana Rossini, senior NFL insider at The Athletic, and my new podcast, Scoop City, is ready to be your go-to football companion this season. Twice a week, myself and Chase Daniel, who played quarterback for 7 different franchises in 14 years, will take you inside the inner workings of the NFL. You'll hear fresh intel, deep analysis, and fascinating interviews with big-ticket guests. So far, we've sat down with Andy Reid, Josh Allen, Sean Payton, and a host of others, with loads more to come. So check out Scoop City this NFL season. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.